Hi, I'm Kiki.
And I'm Kemi.
And you're listening to
Your Advisors Will See You Now, a podcast that will help you to figure out all of your options for life after high school. Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Your Advisors Will See You Now. If you are new here, this is a podcast that helps young adults figure out everything that's life after high school, whether it be getting into a school, picking a career path, doing career chats, and all the above. So today, if you are interested in the admissions process, then you're going to find this episode very interesting. We have a special guest with us today who will discuss admissions and give us more transparency about the process and provide insight about what happens behind the scenes when your application is being processed. So that's always pretty interesting for you, the viewers and listeners, to hear and see what's happening after, because you're always like, oh, they took my paper, what happens next? So today, our special guest is Teege Mettille. And Teege is, am I saying that right? Make sure I'm saying it right.
You got it correct, yes.
Okay. Teege is an independent educational consultant and Director of Enrollment Success at Enroll, ML, an ed tech company that helps college admissions offices. Last year, he published The Admissions Counselor Malaise, bringing intriguing insights into the health and well-being of the admissions profession. Prior to this, he worked as a director, dean, and vice president of enrollment at several small private colleges in Wisconsin and Indiana. Please welcome on our show, Teege. Thank you for having us. And thank you for coming on today.
Oh, yes, thank you. And I'm just imagining just uproarious applause from your audience right now with the welcome to the stage. I am so thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, let's just begin. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you into this field.
Oh, Kemi, that's a great question. What started me in admissions, I was a student affairs professional. At the early stages of my career, I had been an RA in college, or for folks listening who aren't familiar, a resident assistant, the person in the residence halls that had to shut down the parties and tell people to be quiet at night, right? That was my first job in college. And I was working as a hall director, so I would oversee and supervise an entire residence hall building, and wanted to stay in higher ed, but didn't want to stay living on campus anymore. On my way over to admissions, really attracted to the ability, the draw of being able to counsel students, guide students, be a support for students, especially first generation students like myself that needed some more clarity and understanding in the process. That's what drew me to admissions, and I have loved it ever since.
Wow. I feel like your story is definitely it's very relatable. Me and my co-host Kiki, who's not here today, that's how we got suckered into higher ed. That's how our story was too. It was definitely having that great college experience and then wanting to give back at that capacity and then give clarity for those who are trying to navigate the process of coming into college, and then also providing like mentorship, like through advising as well, and helping them to figure out the best fit for them and the best career path. But, I feel like that's the heart of so many people that come into this space of higher education. It's like, I want to help others. Like, I had gleaned a great experience. I want to help other people like me. So I feel like that's always that natural path of how we get into higher ed. Funny.
Kemi, I think there's a group of us, and there's any number of connection points between us, but a group of folks who find their place for the first time in college. And I think for those of us, we're the ones drawn to higher education as a career to help provide that experience or share that experience with other folks who, for whatever reason, college is where things just kind of clicked for them. And I'm happy to be a part of it.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what that is. Like you said it perfectly. It's like that new kind of shift into that new kind of phase. And it's like, oh my goodness, like I feel so, like you said, it's kind of a click. And you're like, I want other people to kind of have what I experienced too. Yeah. So, and just giving back in that way, which is awesome.
Yeah.
So for all of our listeners that are like potentially interested in going the college pathway and applying, can you tell us a little bit? Well, I guess first let's backtrack, because maybe we have some people that have never even thought of the application process or the admissions process. Can you give us just a light overview of the application process? And then talk about some potential ethical dilemmas that people don't see in the background for people that are working in education.
Sure, absolutely. Well, at the highest level, right, the college application process is pretty simple. It's just a student saying, I am interested in attending this institution. They share some materials about their academic and personal background, and then the colleges make admission decisions. So it starts very simple, right? It's just I'm raising my hand. I'm interested in you. Are you interested in having me join your community? But it then gets incredibly complicated in large part because each college is doing its own thing, making decisions for their own reasons and rationalizations and priorities. And so things get complicated quickly for students in the process. That's why folks like myself serve as independent educational consultants or school counselors, guide students through this process because it can be a confusing web of deadlines, terminologies, scholarship applications, all sorts of things like that. But at its core, it's just students saying, I'm interested in this college. Are you interested in me coming to join you? A lot of focus in the news media, in the world generally, is on the highly rejective colleges. You know their names. I don't even need to mention them. But that's not indicative of what this experience is like for most students. The fact is, most colleges admit most of their students, and that's an understatement, right? So the question for students isn't, am I going to get into college or am I going to find a good college? You are, period, right? The question is about finding fit and finding match. And that's where some of the ethical dilemmas come in on the college admissions side. Admissions professionals, just like, you heard me say at the beginning, I wanted to help students find their way. Admissions professionals that I have worked with tend to be, and I'm painting with a bit of a broad brush here, but tend to be very focused on providing access and equity in the college admissions process.
Mm-hmm.
And then they have to juggle the institutional priorities, which sometimes don't line up as perfectly with those kind of mission-driven statements. So I've done some writing on that and talking and presenting on that. But I think that's where the ethical dilemmas start to come in. When the institution, for whatever reason, needs a certain type of student, and then that starts to have disparate impacts on different students that are applying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can imagine that being very tricky because even when I'm like working with someone, I'm advising them on how to go about applying for a college. It's right back to what you said. Is it the right fit for you? And again, the school wants to admit people that are going to be, part of this community. But then it's also like, don't you also want a little bit more diversity in the community as well? Because once you leave the school, there's going to be more diverse thinking that's out there versus this little bubble. Even thinking about when I was back in school, my school was very, very gung-ho on community service and leadership like no other's business, to the point where if you were not in a club and not in some kind of leadership capacity, people were kind of like, what do? You just go to school. Like, it was very interesting. And then, once you graduated, it's like, oh my goodness, like it's such a shift. It's not, I'm actually in the workplace now. There's obviously areas for leadership, but it's totally different. And I have to look for kind of like what I was aligned to that school for differently. So it's just very interesting, and trying to kind of sculpt that community, but also still trying to make it diverse in a way, and how that's balanced.
Yeah, and the balance is that's where the challenge comes in admissions, right? For admissions professionals, because the fact is, the vast majority of times someone is told no in the college admissions process, it's students saying no to a college, right? Students usually get admitted to 5, 6, or 7 colleges that they're not going to go to, right? And so they have to say no to those colleges. And students, if you're listening, please say no to the college when you've decided not to attend. Please tell them, don't just disappear and ghost them, right? They do want to know that you're not coming. But that's where the vast majority of the rejection in this comes in. But again, the focus in popular media and popular culture is on the few colleges that say no to a lot of students, which is, unfortunate. It stresses students out. It causes families to panic, and they really don't need to.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you on that one. Whenever I talk to somebody, they're like, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if I'm going to make it into college." I'm like, "Girl, you got A's. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, where are you trying to go?" And it's not even, like an Ivy League. It's just like just a generally great school. And I'm like, oh, and it's tough too, because especially during that senior year, they have so much stress. They're trying to figure out where I want to go to school, but they're also sometimes even missing that step of like, what do I want to do career wise? And it's like, well, you should probably maybe understand some of that to make sure you're at the layup school for what you need. But it's just so much on their plate in 1 year, because I know some people don't start working till like the senior year. So it's just a lot of stress for them. And I feel bad sometimes when they're like, yeah, like I don't know if I'm gonna make it. And it's like, no, you can relax a bit. Like, don't over stress, don't work yourself to that point. So yeah.
Yeah, I always say, I should say, that families stress about things they should not be stressed about and are way too calm about things they should really be stressed out about, right? Like the priorities are backwards. And the situation you described comes up if a student has let themselves fall in love with one college in particular before they're admitted or before they get their financial aid package. That's when that admission decision for that student with all A's, right? That's when that becomes so high stakes in their mind, because they think they've convinced themselves this college, whatever it is where I have to go. And if I don't get to go there, I'm going to, all my dreams are going to come crashing down. I'm never going to be networked as a professional. My dream, my future is ruined if I don't get into, again, insert the institution.
Yeah.
The same thing comes up at financial aid time. If they've fallen in love with a college that they're admitted to, but they don't know that they can afford it yet, right? So they stress about those things. And I always say to students, if you just keep an open mind, find 5 or 6 colleges that you would do well at, and it's okay to have a preference, but don't let yourself fall in love with one to the exclusion of the other. And if that starts to happen, you've got to stop it. You've got to stop it until you get admitted and get an aid package that's going to work.
I think that's really
then fall in love, right? Once you see the money, then fall in love, get the hoodie, get the sweatshirt, tell all of your friends. But until that happens, play hard to get with these colleges and you'll be fine.
Yeah. I feel like that's kind of like once they get out of college and they start that career process and they start looking for a job, don't fall in love yet until they took the application, you got the interview, you're in. It's like
right.
round one of that practice. What trends are kind of emerging in schools now and how they evaluate any applications? Curious, is there anything new and trending on the horizon?
New and trending. I'm going to tell you what's currently trending, but also what's coming down the pike, I think. What's currently trending is 2 things. First, the return or not return of standardized tests after COVID, right? During COVID, most every college just said, we don't need that anymore. And to be clear, they're right. We do not need the standardized tests. I think we should take the ACT and the SAT and burn it in a fire and then compost the ashes to make sure they never come back. But that's just me, and I don't get invited to the cocktail parties that the ACT throws at the conferences.
Of course.
So some colleges are bringing it back, but not many. By and large, colleges won't need the ACT or the SAT. So that's one thing. The other thing that is currently trending is how colleges are factoring in diversity in student background. The Supreme Court, almost 2 years ago now, a year and a half, issued a ruling related to how colleges could or could not factor in race and ethnicity, and colleges are still kind of navigating through that. Some are doing better than others as far as still kind of managing and balancing, but that'll continue to have reverberations. But what's coming? This is what's fascinating to me. I heard a statistic yesterday. I cannot validate it yet on my own. So this may be mis or disinformation at this point, but directionally, I'll say this. An increasing number of college admissions applications are being written out in large part or entirely by an artificial intelligence chatbot. And an increasing number of college applications are being read and reviewed by chatbots, right? Both sides of the essay process are just being automated. And while students, you should not use AI to write your college essay. I would also say colleges, you should not use AI to read those essays. But I think where this is headed is everybody's just going to recognize that we don't need the essays either, and the essays are going to, within a few years, start to fall away completely.
So I'm curious, what do you think the application will look like if there's not necessarily like a filter or like a standard of rigor? What do you think that it could turn into? Because I've seen if you go into the Common App, I was looking at a college and they didn't have the standardized test, unless maybe if you were like a homeschooler, then they asked for you to submit those. But the application was more robust in that it had an essay, but it also had more unpacking questions to get to know who you were. So do you see it maybe being potentially a longer questionnaire kind of survey?
I don't think so, because that questionnaire will be answered by ChatGPT too, right? So I think
Mhm.
I wouldn't be surprised if some of the more selective institutions require or ask for live interviews or video submissions where the student is speaking to camera. Although even
Mm,
those video recordings are just what 2-3 years away from being entirely AI generated as well, right? Students are going to figure that out. So um,
right.
I don't think that'll be the way so much as colleges are just going to have to get better at understanding the rigor of a high school transcript and get to know each of the high schools better. Um,
Hmm.
I've long said this is when I stopped getting invited to the ACT parties. I've long said, right, the better indicator of how you're going to do at 4 years of college is your 4 years of high school, not 4 hours on a Saturday morning. Um,
Hmm. Yeah.
and so we're going to just have to put pressure on that. Now, the fair point, right? High schools are doing grade inflation in ways that are just perplexing, right? If you look back a generation, there are entire high schools where nobody is ranked in the bottom half of the class because of the way they do their calculations, and the pressure
Hmm.
from parents to make sure that their children have the highest class rank or highest GPA is going to just continue to compound on high schools. So. That's real. There is no standard algebra class, but colleges are going to have to just figure that part out, and they can. They can. We can figure it
Yeah.
out.
Yeah, that's so interesting that you say that too, because I feel like you do have to understand the rigor of like what school they're coming from. But then I also wonder too, like playing devil's advocate, how there's probably going to be some kind of law or regulation that will come through that would try to prevent, some kind of practices that's just allowing people to just come in, even though they know they're not fit to come in. So, like for example, like you perfectly said, if you look at some, I've seen this before, if you look at someone's transcript and there's like D's in gym class and not showing up for gym, it's like they're not showing up to the other classes, but they're getting accepted to, let's say, an institution that does pretty well for itself. And then it's like, but you're not really sure that they're going to succeed academically. It's like, are we doing them a disservice for accepting them because the dropout rate might be higher and they're going to incur the debt? So this is such a we could probably go on and on in an in-depth conversation off this podcast because I feel like people are like, what are they talking about? But it just gets my wheels turning of like how do we do this? How do we do this right? How do we better serve our students? How do we make sure again that it's like a good fit for them?
Hmm.
And also that they're able just to succeed and also graduate within 4 to 6 years too. So many different variables that go into that.
Let's just say 4 years. Let's just stick to 4 years. But
Mhm.
Kemi, that's a really interesting question because I come down pretty hard on colleges or the ACT sometimes. But students and families have a role to play in this as well, in like being realistic about their academic preparation level.
Yeah.
And I'm not of a mind that 100% of students who start as a college freshman should graduate as a senior 4 years from now. If
Hmm.
students aren't able, willing, or going to do the work, I don't think the degree comes automatically from spending the time there. And
Yeah.
so that dance of whose responsibility is it to make sure the student graduates? Yes, the institution has a lot on its plate to make sure the supports are there, the services are there, that it's realistic, that the course availability so that a student can graduate in 4 years is there, right? Like there are things the
Hmm.
institution has to do. But there are things the student has to do as well. There are supports the family
Yeah.
has to give, and I think we all kind of have a role to play in that. But in this market-based economy, right, with college admissions, colleges are taking that on entirely. And I think that does a bit of a disservice to students as well.
Yeah, no, for sure. Oh man, so many different roles and so many variables in higher ed. It's like how do we make this more effective or how do we like how do we nail this down? But yeah, very interesting. Something that you mentioned earlier, I wanted to jump back to was we were talking about AI. It's just so
Hmm.
interesting how we're gonna have people, and it's true, probably use AI to tailor the applications and then AI is reading it. So we just have two robots that are just chatting to each other and not really understand like there's not much of a true human interaction here. I think your idea of potentially shifting to video interviews or that kind of thing, I think that might possibly be the way to go. I think even some jobs have been doing that now too, so that might even be like
Hmm.
potential considerations down the road for that too. But I feel like I'm looking at all my questions, but we definitely just like went through all of them in one night. Uh, what are some specific ways that students can make their applications stand out against competing applications?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, don't have the same chat robot that everybody else is using write your essay, right? So, like, as long as you
Right.
have an essay, don't do that. I promise you, we know that the chances that you use the phrase "a beautiful tapestry of ideas" in the standard world is probably not out there, right? That we know ChatGPT wrote that. And if you are the 1 in 100 people that talks about a beautiful tapestry of ideas, I'm sorry, ChatGPT has ruined that for you, right? You've got to take that out of your lexicon. But the way students can stand out in the admissions process: one, do write it personally. Two, add additional materials, right? So if there are outside extracurriculars or interests or experiences that you want to be sure the college is aware of, don't feel confined to just the format of the application. You can send in a resume, you can send in an activity sheet, you can send additional written pieces. So Kemi, this is true for me. When I was in high school, I had a job working at Auntie Anne's pretzel store. And I can still, to this day, and it's been a minute, I can still flip the pretzels in the air and have them come down in the perfect pretzel shape. It's one of my hidden talents. I still host pretzel
Your party
parties from
trick.
time to time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if there are experiences of, whether they're extracurricular in nature or volunteer, or you had a job, or you had family responsibilities where you were caring for siblings, put that in there, right? Even if there's not a space for it, make the space for it and pass it along to the college. The worst they can do is choose not to read it, right? And then finally, the third thing would be reach out to your admissions counselor. They are, I promise you, kind, sweet, caring people that, with the exception of those few colleges I don't like to talk about, are looking for ways to get you into their college, not ways to keep you out.
I love that you touched on that too. Definitely having them kind of like create this full picture in the admissions mind, because I think sometimes too, people just think it's just the application where I'm just filling in like when I'm going to graduate my GPA, and they think it's just the essay. But it's really just creating as many pieces as possible, so that way the person can read who you are off the paper. And I think sometimes it can be so easy to be caught up in, oh man, I should probably do at least 2 activities. It's like, well, if you have life that's going on outside, I've had like a student before that was one of the caregivers for his sister. It's like, put that on there. Like, we want to get to know like who you are, like what's taking up most of your time, what your other passions are too. So really creating that picture for the admissions personnel to, like, you're literally lifted off that sheet of paper. You're no longer a stranger on that sheet of paper. And it makes you stand out more because it's more like personal too. So I really agree with you, what you're saying, and just like adding more material that sheds light about who you are as an individual too, versus, you seem like, I feel like I just need to check off these 3 boxes and just do the bare minimum. And that's what I need, is like kind of go for it to stand out more.
Yeah.
And I want to ask this question too, because I feel like these ones are always like going back to what people think are the norm in the application. And I want to get your true feedback on this. What role does demonstrating leadership or community involvement play in strengthening an application? I do feel like whenever you're looking at any college, they always want to know at least leadership or community service, right? Can you just speak to that a little bit? And can you kind of speak to if that still holds true for all schools, or do you still think that's something that we should be, actively putting in our application?
Yeah, we'll definitely actively put it in the application, but here's how it comes into play. The vast majority, I would say over 80 or even 85% of admission decisions that go out in this country every year are based purely on academics, right? The vast majority are just, what does the transcript say? And that's gonna lead to a clear yes or a clear no decision. And there's no essay, there's no activity, there's no volunteer experience that is going to change it most of the time. However, what we're talking about are those bubble cases, those edge cases where a student is admissible, but it's not a clear yes or a clear no, right? So they're kind of in that middle area. And that middle area is larger for some colleges, right? Like if you were to tell me you're applying to one of the Ivy League colleges, well, that middle area is very vast, right? If you were going to tell me you're applying to a college that suddenly ended up in the Final Four for the first time, their middle area just blew up because they got a whole lot new or a whole new set of applications. So it's if you're in that middle area for a college where they're going to turn to some of those tiebreaker things, such as leadership, involvement, that's where they might get into specific course grades, right? Like, tell me, are you on an upward trend with your GPA versus a downward trend, et cetera? Things like that, including leadership and volunteer experience, are going to be what tips a student from a maybe to a yes or a maybe to a no.
Yeah. So it's kind of like that when you're on that line and it's like, whether it's yes or no, it can tilt the scale in your favor. Yeah, I can totally understand that too. Especially when you're getting, I'm not even sure if you know the number off the top of your head. What's roughly the amount of applications, like on average, that a school even will get in a year?
Oh, wow. That depends. I mean, it depends on the size of the school, right? But a better way to think of it is institutions are getting, I would say, on average, about 8 applications for every student who's going to end up enrolling.
That's a good way to think about it.
So, yeah.
Okay.
And so as such, the average rate of applicants who end up enrolling is around 12.5% for colleges generally. Some are higher, some are lower. But that's kind of where things land.
Okay. So you got to think in your mind, you're playing Hunger Games with 8 people. That's what you're thinking of with your application. Okay. But
Sure. But remember, most of the 8 people are going to choose to opt out of the Hunger Games, right? Because they're going to choose to go somewhere else.
That's true. That is very true. That's right. I've had some talks with some students before about some of my ideas for this, but I would really love to hear your feedback on this. How can students highlight their unique strengths, especially if they don't have any traditional extracurriculars?
Right. Especially, again, that was me, right? Like, I was working so much in high school, I did not have time for the traditional extracurriculars, right? And I felt like I was in a situation where I had to be working. It is clear and apparent, and in some cases, like the Common App, is just outright designed for, tell me the leadership roles you had in high school clubs and organizations. And for students for whom that doesn't fit perfectly, it can feel very othering. It can feel very dismissive of their experience, and they may feel dismissive of their experience. If you're working 15 hours a week at McDonald's, you might not see how that applies to succeeding in college. But I assure you, it does, right? And we see that. So if students, if nothing else, right, just make sure we know that that's happening. That's great. But if they're able to draw connections to times they've taken on, maybe not leadership roles positionally, maybe they don't have a shift manager position at McDonald's, but they can talk about a time when things got really tight, on the shift, or they were understaffed, or they had to step up for a colleague, or they had to kind of diffuse the situation. Those are things. Find ways to include that into your application. Again, even if you're just saying, here's a whole nother sheet of paper you did not ask for, I want you to have it.
Yeah, I totally agree. Definitely trying to sit in those moments, like reflect. It's like there had to be one time where you were showing leadership, or even something I told someone. I was like, okay, you're a junior now. I was like, you haven't done anything. I was like, well, what's in your area that you feel needs change? Like, like you think that there's it's like you live near a beach and there's trash everywhere. It's like you could take the lead by just even trying to assemble all your friends on a Saturday and maybe doing something once a month. It's like you can even kind of create those opportunities if you have time, if you're not like, senior, like right now. But you still have like opportunities to think, creatively, to take initiative in some kind of way that can show value on there. So, yeah.
Can I tell a story? I was a foster parent, right? So I have a high school sophomore, but he was adopted through foster care. And 10 years or so ago, a little longer, I had a high school junior staying with us in foster care. And I took him to a college visit nearby, not a highly selective college, right? Like, I know they're an open enrollment institution that you just have to be interested in. You're getting it. I know that. Yeah. But because they play the selectivity game and they want to look more expensive, they pretended like it was a big deal. Fine. I know the game. But I will never forget watching the student I was guiding. In the interview, there was a meeting with the admissions counselor during the visit. The counselor had a clipboard in front of him and a pen, and asked, like, "Oh, tell me about any leadership experiences you've had in clubs in high school." And he has not been in clubs, right? Like, he was raising himself until he was doing the grocery shopping because his father was unable to. And he kind of looked at me and shook his head and said, "I don't have any." And the counselor said, "Oh, none? Okay." And then you saw him put a big X on the clipboard. And then he said, "Well, what organizations what clubs have you been involved with?" And again, he hadn't been in any, and he said that. And he said, and the counselor said, "Nothing, not even a volunteer experience." And again, a big X. And it was very deflating for that student. I followed up with the director. I was like, "Just so you know, this happened." And the director was aghast. Like, that's not what we do. And, that's not how that should have gone. But I hold that story in mind when I was a director of admission, a dean of admission, and making sure that we weren't ever making a student feel that way. And I promise you that. I promise students and families who are listening, we don't think that way, right? Like as a profession, are there exceptions? Of course, but we see that there is unique value in every student's story. And when you're in that middle area, right, not a clear admit, not a clear deny, when you're in the middle, that's what we're trying to learn and pick up from you. So tell us your story. Tell us your story and how it relates to who you're becoming. We don't expect high school juniors or seniors to be fully formed and developed before they get to college. We want to be a part of that, but show us where you are on the journey so far.
I love that too, because I feel like some of them put this pressure on them to when they have their application, they're like, "Yeah, I was the class president. I invented the telephone. And at the same time, I also rescued 2 children from a fire." So it's like, I feel like they have that stress of they have to be so well-rounded versus like, no, they want to see your authentic self. That's what they really want to see. And I feel like ChatGPT, I feel like that's how admissions will be able to see some of like, the phoniness of the ChatGPT or whatever AI you're using. Just be authentic, y'all out there. Just be authentic. Just be authentic. And then lastly, I guess I would like to ask, actually 2 other things I would like to ask are, in this current like state of higher education, are they still showing more, like, do they really like seeing students that take AP courses or leaning more towards those who take those kind of academic rigor classes? Are you still seeing that? Especially if they're going to take away standardized testing, do you think they might lean heavily on that?
Right. There's 2 answers, right? There's the vast majority of colleges for whom the answer is it doesn't matter. They'll take anyone who is going to get a high school diploma and is interested, right? So that's the majority of colleges. But when that question is asked, it's usually along the lines of, am I a more competitive candidate at a more selective institution if I take the AP course versus not? And the answer to that is yes.
Yeah. Okay. Spot on. All right, cool. And I think that's good because that information, it allows people to know if you want to go to like a really competitive school, then that's kind of how you have to position yourself to be competitive. But it also allows people to have a breather in mind if they want to go to like a school that doesn't have a really competitive admission rate. It can let them breathe a little bit too. So I think that's really helpful to hear people. And my last question is, what are some things that you should absolutely avoid on the application itself? Do you have any interesting stories?
Typos, grammatical errors are the biggest things that jump out. I can tell stories about it. It's not that we expect students to be perfect, but this essay should be proofread by a couple people before submitted. If it's going to matter, right? Again, for most students, it won't matter. We won't get to the essay, and that's okay. The biggest mistake I actually see, and I point to this a lot, especially here in the Midwest, where Midwestern humble mindset is in full display, is students don't brag about themselves enough. It feels immodest. They undercut the value of their experience. We've been talking a lot about students who've been working during high school. I think students overlook the positives that says about your ability to work as a team, your ability to take direction, your ability to take initiative, right? Your ability to balance school and work, all things you're going to need in college. So I think students undersell themselves too much in the college admissions process. So aside from typos and grammatical errors, that would be what I would say.
That was great. This is a very enlightening episode. I think this was great. I think this is going to also just encourage a lot of our listeners that are out there, some people that are doing the regular admissions right now, because we already had, what was it? It was last in December. What was it? December, November was early admissions and early decision. But now it's like the regular admission time. But I think some people will find this really nice, give them a nice breath of fresh air too. So that way they're not like stressing out during this time because they're trying to figure everything out during the senior year. And Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Do you want to share? Do you have like any social media outlets? Do you want to reshare where they can find your book?
Oh, sure. My book, I can't imagine there's many people in your audience that'd be interested in it. But yes, it's The Admissions Counselor Malaise, available on Amazon, and really chronicles how admissions counselors have become disenchanted with their job over the course of a generation. Otherwise, folks can find me on LinkedIn. I promise you, I am the only Teege that will show up. So Teege, you will find me. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Teege. We really appreciate having you on. And thank you also, listeners who listened in today. We hope to hear you in our list. We hope to see you in our next episode. Man, this is my first episode back from the new year, and you can tell I'm a little rusty. But we're happy that you're all here listening in, and we hope to see you in the next one. We'll see you. Bye.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and listening to the latest episode of Your Advisors Will See You Now. Please make sure to follow us on all of our social media pages and check out our website. Take a look at the show notes below.
And please make sure to subscribe and share this podcast. Also, show us some love and please leave a 5-star review. Catch you next time.
See ya.